Hello, you are listening to an archived worship service of First Presbyterian Church, Columbus, Mississippi. Thank you for listening.
In the wilderness, on that mountaintop, the great prophet and leader Moses received the good gift of God, the Decalogue, or simply the 10 words of God, or as we call them, the commandments. These are commands for living before God, commands for living with one another. The gift orders the life of the people who have been freed from the bonds of slavery, a people remembering a covenant made many, many years before them. As John Calvin would state much later, these laws would restrain their hearts and our hearts from the chaos of the wilderness, the chaos of evil, while giving us a glimpse of who God is revealed to be. The gift shows us how to live as Christ's good creation, as what was ordered from the beginning of time, what could be our future. The gift shows us what God's intention is when creation breathes forth. But these commandments also left many questions in the application. Almost immediately, the people began to spell out, or better define, these 10 words given by God to give them clarity and parameters. No other commandment received the heavy attention as did the fourth. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Called by the Hebrew people the Shabbat, it means to cease, or sometimes Shev means to sit. Often we call it the Sabbath, which means day of rest. It recalled the story of creation, the seventh day, on which God rested from work, giving a model for all of creation to follow. Now, Mishnahs, or teachings, began to define this, refine this over time. It begins at sundown on Friday. It ends at sundown on Saturday. Rest simply meant to resist work. But what was work? Many more Mishnahs defined what work could be, and 39 activities were defined by the time Jesus was alive. Things that should not happen on the day of rest. Now, all these prohibitions, all these actions were put into a large categories. 4 general groups were represented here. There was the baking of bread. 11 laws in the baking of bread. There was the making of clothes. 13 laws for the making of clothes. There was the making of leather. Only nine laws in the making of leather. And building a structure. Just 6. The 4 categories, the 39 laws in all, gave restrictions to what could and could not be done once the sun goes down on Friday. God's gift to the people had become buried under a mountain of red tape. The bureaucracy of the Pharisees' tradition became a burden and drudgery and marred the gift as it was given. In our text today, Jesus butts heads with those who found religiousness, righteousness in keeping rules. Since Pharisees did not have a huge presence in Galilee, and Pharisees did not traditionally stand out in grain fields, we have to believe that our story implies three things. The first is that Jesus and his disciples have actually been doing this pretty routinely. We have to assume, number two, that someone told on him. And we have to make the third assumption that they were on a stakeout to catch him. Can you imagine these Pharisees in all of their finest on the Sabbath day? They could not walk themselves, so maybe they had been there overnight, sleeping in the grain field, to catch Jesus and his disciples doing wrong. Now, if Jesus was unaware of this at first, he certainly knew it after the chastisement of his disciples in the field, which means that our second text, the second half of our text today, is simply a setup. It's called entrapment. There's bait. An unaware, an unnamed soul made to sit in the worship, the house of worship. The poor unnamed soul who was ritually unclean by his withered hand is positioned where he was not allowed to be by purity laws. The Pharisees sit back and set the trap. Standing near, they would have made an odd sort of sight until Jesus came to worship and the trap was set. What would this young rabbi do? Would he follow the rules? Or would he break them, proving that he himself is no true teacher of the Hebrew faith? The trap is sprung. In boldness and injustice, Jesus' anger comes out. Jesus springs the trap. The man is healed, making him whole and part of the community and ritually clean in the holiest of places. For the Pharisees, this is offensive because it breaks a rule. For Christ, this was offensive because it dehumanized a child of God, using him as bait, allowing him to remain broken in the name of God's law. Now, if you remember nothing else from today's sermon, I hope you remember this. In this passage, and in dozens of others throughout the Gospels, like when Jesus touches a leper, like when he sits and has a conversation with the Samaritan, with a woman in daylight, or when he's standing over the woman caught in adultery, there is not one instance in all of our Gospels where Jesus chooses a rule over a person. There's not one instance that Jesus chooses a rule over love and dignity and wholeness of a person. Not one single time. Jesus fulfills the law of Moses, but strikes at the Mishnah, the teachings that have soured the gift that God gives us. Jesus cannot sit by when what was good has turned into something bad. What was helpful and hopeful has been manipulated into gotcha trappings. This does not as some have suggested over the centuries, make Jesus out to be some rule breaker for the sake of it, not an anarchist, far from it. Jesus fulfills the law of God, not only as the true Word made flesh, but by reminding us why the law is a gift to begin with. The gift of Sabbath is not to be a new shackle and chain. It was never intended to re-enslave the people in the wilderness. But it is a reminder of what true freedom can be. Freedom to and freedom from. Labor needs to be put aside. We need Sabbath rest. Our minds are made for that. Our body needs that. Our soul yearns for that. Our community needs Sabbath, a rest modeled by God in a way our life can reflect God's goodness in creation. We often live in a chronos time, an earthly time that tells us where and when to be. God invites us into a kairos, a time apart, a time with God. The Pharisee tradition of time looks quite different than ours today. What enslaves us, what holds us captive, is an inheritance from our Puritan ancestry, where being busy is good, where being idle is fodder for the devil. And so we take that practice into our daily lives, where we all have booked calendars, over-programmed kids, never-ending commitments, and an 80-hour work week. And we call that good, forgetting the gift. We are as guilty and in need of correction as those Pharisees standing in the corner. Jesus would say, the Sabbath was made for you, not you for the Sabbath, because it's holy. Rest, sit, cease, worship. This is not a trick. Let the good gift of God be the good gift of your life. So today, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Amen.